In just 48 hours, the U.S. Army suffers its worst defeat since Pearl Harbor. At Kasserine Pass, German Panzer Division shatter inexperienced American units. More than 6,000 U.S. casualties. Entire regiments flee. Command collapses. American generals argue from bunkers 70 miles behind the front, while German officers later admit they expected to break through to the coast. Washington is alarmed. Eisenhower is furious. The U.S. Army's credibility in World War II is on the line. Then on March 6, 1943, a general arrives who believes one thing above all else. Wars are not won by evacuations. Within 30 minutes, he fires his first officer. Within 10 days, dozens more will be gone. This is the story of why George S. Patton fired his own officers after Kasserine Pass, and how those 10 days saved the American Army. Kasserine Pass was not simply a defeat, it was a revelation. For the first time, the U.S. Army faced veteran German formations in open battle, and it failed at every level. American units were spread thin, artillery poorly coordinated, armor misused, and most critically, commanders were absent. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, commanding U.S. II Corps, operated from a fortified bunker carved into rock miles from the fighting. Orders were vague. Units fought in isolation. When German General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim attacked, American lines folded one after another. German after-action reports later noted something striking. U.S. troops fought bravely, but without leadership. This mattered deeply to Eisenhower. The issue was no longer tactics or equipment, it was command culture. The U.S. Army had not fought a major battle since 1918. Promotions had been based on training performance and seniority, not combat judgment. Kasserine exposed the truth that every army eventually learns the hard way. You do not know who can lead until men start dying. The solution would not be gradual, it would be immediate. On March 6, 1943, Lieutenant General George S. Patton assumes command of U.S. Second Corps. His orders from Eisenhower are clear. Restore discipline, restore confidence, restore victory. Patton does not begin with speeches. He begins with inspections. Within 30 minutes, he fires an officer, relieved on the spot, for appearing at the front without a helmet. To Patton, this was not about appearances. It was about example. Officers who ignored regulations signaled fear, hesitation, or detachment. Patton believed those traits spread faster than any disease. He orders strict enforcement of uniforms, saluting, weapons maintenance, and position discipline. He personally visits units daily, moving closer to the front than any corps commander before him. Officers who remain in the rear are identified. Names are written down. Patton's command diary records his belief plainly. Men will do exactly what their officers do. This was not rage, it was method. What followed was not chaos, it was selection. Over the next 10 days, Patton systematically removed officers who failed under fire. Battalion and regimental commanders who stayed behind the lines were relieved without ceremony. Some were sent home, others were reassigned permanently out of combat roles. Their careers effectively ended. At the same time, Patton promoted aggressively. Majors who led from the front, adapted under pressure, and acted decisively were elevated over senior officers who hesitated. This was radical by U.S. Army standards, but it worked. Crucially, Patton applied standards consistently. Favoritism was minimal, performance was everything. Omar Bradley, serving under Patton, later wrote that this moment changed the U.S. Army's officer corps permanently.
Many of the men Patton elevated in Tunisia would go on to command divisions in Sicily, France, and Germany. Those who failed during the purge, they never returned to combat leadership. The transformation was not yet visible, but it was already underway.
Patton's changes were not cosmetic, they were operational. Within days, Second Corps began to look and act like a fighting force. Movement schedules were enforced to the minute. Artillery coordination drills ran day and night. Units were ordered to dig in properly, camouflage positions, and maintain constant contact with adjacent formations. Patton personally reviewed maps with junior officers, demanding they understand not just their sector, but the enemy's likely response. German commanders later noted this shift. Intercepts and post-war interviews reveal surprise at how quickly American units stopped reacting and began anticipating. Defensive positions grew tighter. Counterattacks were immediate rather than delayed. This was not brilliance, it was accountability. Patton believed discipline reduced uncertainty, and in war, uncertainty kills faster than enemy fire. By enforcing simple standards relentlessly, he removed hesitation from the system. Officers no longer wondered if orders would be enforced, they knew they would. Morale followed competence. For the first time since landing in North Africa, American soldiers sensed control returning. The test was coming. Patton did not remove officers for failure alone. He removed them for absence. After-action reviews showed a pattern. Units that collapsed often had commanders who were physically distant when decisions mattered most. Patton considered this unforgivable. Combat leadership, in his view, required proximity, not comfort. Conversely, junior officers who improvised under fire were singled out. Majors who reorganized shattered platoons, coordinated artillery on the move, or counterattacked without waiting for permission were promoted rapidly. This echoed a philosophy shared by Army Chief of Staff George Marshall. War reveals leaders, and the Army must act before hesitation becomes habit. Critics later called Patton ruthless, but Bradley noted something important. The standards were clear, and they applied to everyone. The purge was not personal, it was structural. Those who remained understood the rules. Lead forward, adapt fast, or be replaced. German commanders were not blind to what was happening. Reports from the Africa Corps in early March describe a marked improvement in American coordination. Where U.S. forces had previously yielded ground, they now countered with artillery barrages and armor maneuvering in concert. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim later stated that American reactions became unexpectedly firm. Units that once retreated now held under pressure. Attacks stalled where breakthroughs had been routine weeks earlier. This was critical. German doctrine relied on momentum. When resistance stiffened, timetables collapsed. Fuel, ammunition, and operational flexibility suffered. Patton's reforms did not make American troops superior overnight. They made them predictable to themselves and unpredictable to the enemy. The battlefield balance was shifting. By March 17, 1943, Second Corps was ready. Not confident, but functional. Patton positioned his forces near El Guettar, a narrow pass the Germans would need to attack through. Artillery was layered, infantry was entrenched, armor was held back, not squandered. This time, plans accounted for German reactions, not just American intentions. The same army that had lost 6,000 men in 48 hours at Kasserine was now bracing for impact, with discipline, clarity,
and leadership present at every level. The outcome was not yet known, but the transformation was undeniable. And in the coming battle, the difference between February's collapse and March's resistance would become unmistakably clear.
At dawn on March 23, 1943, German forces advanced on El Guettar. Veteran panzer units moved with confidence. This was terrain they understood. Narrow approaches, limited maneuver space, ideal for armor-led assaults. 2 weeks earlier, the same attack would likely have rolled through American lines. This time, it did not. U.S. forward observers identified German armor early. Artillery fire plans, prepared in advance and rehearsed repeatedly, went into effect within minutes. Instead of scattered resistance, German tanks drove into layered fields of fire. Patton remained forward, receiving reports directly rather than filtered through multiple headquarters. Unit commanders acted without waiting for permission, confident they would be supported rather than second-guessed. The Germans pushed harder, the Americans held. For the first time in North Africa, U.S. forces were not reacting to the enemy. They were controlling the fight.
The decisive factor at El Guettar was not armor. It was artillery. Under Patton's enforcement, artillery units had trained relentlessly on rapid response, coordination, and massed fire. When German tanks advanced, U.S. guns did not fire individually, they fired together. Within hours, German armor losses mounted. By day's end, more than 30 German tanks lay destroyed or disabled in front of American positions. German officers later described the fire as unexpectedly precise and relentless. Attacks stalled, momentum evaporated. Patton's belief that disciplined systems save lives was being proven in real time. Infantry losses were significantly lower than at Kasserine. Units held cohesion even under pressure. This was not heroics, it was process.
German attacks continued over several days. They failed. American units absorbed pressure, counterattacked when necessary, and, critically, maintained command continuity. Officers stayed forward. Communications remained intact. When plans failed, they were adjusted, not abandoned. This was the opposite of Kasserine. Omar Bradley later wrote that El Guettar marked the moment the U.S. Army found itself, not because it won flawlessly, but because it did not collapse. Patton's officer purge now revealed its purpose. Every commander remaining had already been tested and passed. There were no unknowns left in the chain of command. For Eisenhower, the message was unmistakable. The Second Corps was no longer a liability. It was an asset. By April 3, 1943, the battle was over. The Germans withdrew. El Guettar was not a perfect victory. Losses were real, mistakes were made, but the outcome mattered less than the lesson. In 11 days, Patton had taken a defeated corps and restored its combat credibility. Not through new weapons, not through months of retraining, but through ruthless, consistent accountability. The officers who survived his purge went on to lead American divisions across Sicily, France, and Germany. Many became the backbone of the U.S. Army in Europe. Those who were relieved, they never commanded troops in battle again. Patton's methods were controversial, but at El Guettar they worked. Publicly, Eisenhower said little about Patton's methods. Privately, his conclusions were decisive. Correspondence from late March 1943 shows Eisenhower acknowledging that Second Corps had been recovered faster than expected.
He did not credit tactics or equipment. He credited command climate. The difference, in his view, was leadership present at the point of decision. Eisenhower had already removed Fredendall before Patton arrived, but Patton's follow-through confirmed something Eisenhower suspected. Replacing one commander was not enough. The problem had been deeper, embedded across the officer corps. What Patton demonstrated was that command failure was not abstract. It was observable, measurable, and correctable, if one acted quickly and accepted the political cost. This realization shaped Eisenhower's later decisions in Europe, including when to back aggressive commanders and when to quietly remove those who stalled under pressure. Patton's role in Tunisia became a proof of concept, not for cruelty, but for decisive accountability.
Lord Fredendall was not court-martialed. He was not demoted. Instead, he was quietly moved out of combat leadership. This reflected a reality of wartime command. Political considerations often prevent formal punishment, but operational trust, once lost, is rarely restored. Fredendall was promoted to lieutenant general later, but never again entrusted with front-line troops. Patton understood this distinction. His purge was not about humiliation, it was about irreversibility. Officers relieved under him were not meant to return once conditions improved. War did not allow second experiments. This approach echoed Marshall's philosophy. Peacetime promotions could be corrected, wartime mistakes could not. The message filtered downward rapidly. Command was no longer a protected position. It was conditional, earned daily, under fire.
The U.S. Army emerged from Tunisia changed. For the first time, combat performance, not seniority, became the primary measure of leadership. Officers were evaluated not on plans written, but on actions taken under pressure. This shift would echo across Sicily, Normandy, and the Ardennes. Many of the officers Patton elevated in March 1943 later commanded divisions and corps in Europe. They shared one trait: decisiveness in uncertainty. They did not wait for perfect information. They acted and adjusted. The cost of learning this lesson had been high, but the alternative, continuing with untested leadership, would have been far worse. Kasserine exposed the problem. Patton exploited the moment to fix it.
Patton is often remembered for aggression, profanity, and spectacle, but his core belief was simpler. He believed that winning quickly saved lives. This did not make him indifferent to casualties. It made him intolerant of delay, hesitation, and incompetence. To Patton, every unnecessary pause extended the war and increased the cost paid by soldiers. This philosophy explains his actions in March 1943 better than temperament ever could. The purge was not emotional, it was preventative. Patton was not shaping an army for comfort, he was shaping it for survival. And in the final scenes of this story, the consequences, both good and troubling, become impossible to ignore.
By late 1943, a pattern had emerged. Many of the officers Patton elevated during those 10 days in Tunisia were no longer anonymous majors or colonels. They were commanding divisions in Sicily, corps in France, and armies in Germany. They had been selected not for polish or pedigree, but for performance under fire. Omar Bradley was one of them. So were numerous regimental commanders who later led troops across Normandy and into the Rhineland. Their shared experience in North Africa shaped how they commanded: forward presence, rapid decisions, intolerance for paralysis. This was Patton's quiet legacy. Not speeches, but people. The purge did not merely fix Second Corps.
It seated the American army with leaders who understood that command was not permanent, it was conditional.
Post-war German interviews reveal an unexpected admission. Several commanders noted that the Americans they faced later in 1943 and 1944 were not the same army encountered at Kasserine. The difference, they said, was not courage, it was adaptability. German doctrine respected commanders who could change plans mid-battle. At Kasserine, Americans had not done this. At Guettar, and afterward, they did. Patton's insistence on initiative aligned more closely with German operational thinking than with traditional Allied caution. This unnerved German planners, who relied on predictable responses to create breakthroughs. Ironically, Patton's ruthlessness made the American army harder, not easier, to defeat.
But Patton's system carried risks. Rapid promotions meant some officers rose faster than their experience allowed. Harsh discipline could suppress dissent, and mistakes, when they occurred, happened at full speed. Critics inside the Army worried that fear of removal might discourage honest reporting or encourage reckless aggression. These concerns were not theoretical. They surfaced repeatedly during later campaigns. Yet wartime command is a balance between imperfect choices. Patton accepted the danger of speed because he believed delay was deadlier. His methods were not universally applicable, but in crisis they proved effective.
George Marshall never commanded troops in battle during World War II. Patton did, constantly. Yet their philosophies converged at one point. Leadership must be tested, and failure must be acted upon immediately. Marshall removed dozens of generals during the war, quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. Patton did the same, but visibly, publicly, and fast. Both understood something uncomfortable. Modern war exposes weakness brutally, and sentimentality kills. Tunisia became the proving ground where Marshall's theory met Patton's execution.
By mid-1943, the American Army had regained confidence. By 1945, it would help defeat Nazi Germany. But the question left behind by Kasserine and Patton's purge remains unresolved. Could this transformation have happened without defeat, without humiliation, without loss? Or did the U.S. Army need to break before it could learn? Patton believed the answer was no, and he acted accordingly. The final scenes of this story confront what his actions achieved and what they demanded in return.
The changes forged in Tunisia did not stay in North Africa. When American forces landed in Sicily in July 1943, many of the officers tested under Patton now commanded at higher levels. They brought with them habits formed in crisis: constant movement, forward leadership, and rapid decision-making under uncertainty. Mistakes still occurred, losses were real, but the paralysis seen at Kasserine never returned. By the time U.S. forces entered France in 1944, the American Army operated with a confidence that had not existed a year earlier. Units expected commanders to be present. Commanders expected to be judged. The institutional memory of failure, combined with Patton's uncompromising correction, had reshaped how the Army fought.
Patton is often remembered as reckless with lives. The record suggests something more complex. Studies conducted after the war showed that Patton's Third Army, despite its rapid advances, suffered lower casualty rates relative to ground covered than many slower-moving formations. His belief that speed shortened battles and reduced exposure was not without evidence. This does not absolve his excesses. It explains his reasoning. For Patton, discipline and aggression were not opposites. They were complementary. One enabled the other, and together, he believed, they ended wars faster. Tunisia was where that philosophy first proved itself.
Equally telling are the names that vanish from the record. The officers Patton relieved in March 1943 did not resurface in Normandy, the Bulge, or the final push into Germany. They did not fail again, because they were never given the chance. This absence is part of the story's cost. Patton's system allowed no recovery period, no second evaluation. It traded long-term development for immediate certainty. In total war, Patton believed this trade was justified. History offers no counterfactual, only outcomes.
Kasserine Pass is often remembered as an embarrassment. In reality, it was an education. It revealed that modern war punishes untested leadership instantly. It showed that training without accountability collapses under pressure. And it demonstrated that armies adapt, or they fail repeatedly. Patton's 10-day purge was not the only possible response, but it was the one chosen, and it worked. Not because Patton was infallible, but because the system he imposed forced clarity where confusion had ruled.
On March 6, 1943, George Patton took command of a broken corps. By March 17th, it was ready to fight again. By March 23rd, it proved it could hold. Those 10 days did not win the war, but they ensured the U.S. Army would be capable of doing so. Patton fired his own officers not out of anger, but out of urgency. He understood something uncomfortable and enduring. In war, leadership failure costs lives immediately. Correction delayed costs far more. That is why those 10 days still matter, and why Kasserine was not the end, but the beginning.
If you value historically grounded World War II documentaries like this, built from real records, real battles, and real decisions, please consider subscribing. Most people watching this channel are not subscribed, especially those watching on television. If that's you, subscribing now helps ensure these documentaries keep getting to you. On TV, you can subscribe by pressing the OK button on your remote. On mobile or desktop, the subscribe button is just below this video. New documentaries like this are released regularly. Thank you for watching.